Hey guys, what is up? Kid here of Burn One with the Shadowverse Evolve channel, bringing you another deck profile on Omens Internal, the new booster just releasing. We have Thief Sword, which is a popular archetype that is now in the meta. It has a lot of really interesting tools, and you get to steal some of your opponent's cards as well. So let's just get right into the deck itself. Alright, so here is the deck itself. We're kind of back into that mid-range to late game plan of winning games through usually Leonidas or outvaluing our opponent instead of going for the premium aggro strategy that Hero Sword provided us. Because of that, we're going to have a little bit more value pieces once again in the deck. Like I said, Leonidas, Dark Angel Olivia, some of the new Thief cards as well provide a lot of value, so we'll just get right into the deck itself. Because we're not looking to be as aggressive as before, we're kind of back on Bellringer Angel. It's a good tool to stop aggro as well as slow down the game a little bit so we can get into the position to outvalue our opponent, as well as, Last Word is a very powerful effect on Bellringer Angel because we get a draw card. We play one of the Evo because the Evo is just that good, and just having a one of the Evo always feels great. Maid Leader is back. We're only playing it as a 2 of though. We do play one of the Evo because the fact that we're playing a lot of these Evo followers that have insane value as the game goes on. It's pretty important to get back into that swing of things where we want to build up hand size, outvalue our opponent that way, and we get to grab some of our key pieces like Leonidas and some of our other Thief cards, Floral Fencer for turns 3 and 4. All very good targets for a Maid Leader. The new Servant of Usurpation here. This card is just the new sword goblin, essentially. It's just in the archetype, which is good. It makes our opponent mill, and then whenever our opponent does mill from the top of their deck, we get to add 1 to the attack. So this is a card that has potential to just kind of snowball if your opponent doesn't have an answer for it, really, but honestly they should be having some kind of answer for it every time. But it's still a very powerful card. Worst case scenario, it's going to be a 1-drop 2/2, which is just good enough and it's on game plan for the deck itself. Playing 3 swordsmen, I think at the end of the day, one of the best ways for us to interact with our opponent sometimes still is force engaging things, because some of the greatest value we have in the deck is not necessarily through spells, it's through our followers. So swordsman's still a very great statted follower that also has effects that generate good value for us and force trades when our opponent thinks they can get away with a standard follower. Play 2 of Angelic Snipe. We're kind of in that value game plan. Like I said, I think Angelic Snipe right now is going to come back into favor for a lot of decks. I think there are a lot of easy cards to be targeting for 1 mana to just remove them from the game, because there's just a lot of 2 health followers running around right now, along with one of the new 2 drops that will be running in this deck, as well as a lot of other decks will be running. So we have the 1-drop Avarita spell here. I hopefully said that right. Once again, this is another value engine. So on turn 1, if we have nothing really to play, at least this can kind of search out for one of our key pieces here, which is Octress. Octress is super powerful, so we want to see it at some point in the game. This is one of the ways to find it. And if we do hit it, we got to add this card back to our hand, which means we can then search for another key piece. Whenever you're like searching for storm damage or something later in the game, this is a good way to find it. It's not good enough to play it as a 3 of, personally, I feel like, but the fact that it can get Octress and generate more value that way too is pretty good. Anytime we're left with like 1 play point floating and we have nothing to do with it, this is a good spell just to cast, get some value out of it. Sometimes you will get +2 instead of just the 1. Fina here is, if you saw the other videos and our set review videos, we talked about how powerful this card is. We have a lot of really solid 1-drops in this list, so finding a 1-drop off of this if our opponent has nothing to remove on the board. Otherwise, if our opponent is going second, they play a 1-drop on turn 1. Turn 2, we get to play Fina here. It's aggressively statted, which is good, and we get to remove one of their followers. So like we kind of already put them on the back foot and already start winning from the beginning of the game, which is really, really good. Play it as a 3 of because it's just that good of a card. Octress here, one of the key pieces that makes the Thief archetype very fun and very powerful to play. 2-drop that evolves for 2. Otherwise, if your opponent has 10 or more cards in their cemetery, you can evolve for 0, which is pretty big. So a lot of times this is just a 2-cost 4/4 because the Evo side is a 4/4. On Fanfare, your opponent has to put the top 2 cards of the deck into the cemetery, helping with that Thief game plan. But the last piece here, which is like the cherry on top, something you won't always be using, but it's a very powerful tool to be using into the late game, which is you can pay 8 play points to select the card in your opponent's cemetery and play it for 0 play points, which is very scary. But the other part of this card, which is really insane, is the on Evo part. It still keeps the same things as before, but it has on Evo, select a card in your opponent's cemetery and put it into your EX area. So if you're playing against Abyss and you're afraid of them bringing back something with Death's Breath, you can steal it from their cemetery. So now they don't have a chance to actually bring that card back. And then it has the secondary effect there at the bottom, which is if there are at least 10 cards in your opponent's cemetery, any card you play from your EX area costs 2 less, which is pretty big. And it still has the same exact activated ability. The activated ability is not the most insane part of the card, though it can help you win games. It's more the fact that this is going to be a 2-drop 4/4 a lot of the times, on top of being able to steal key pieces from your opponent. Stealing your opponent's Dark Angel Olivia, for example, things like that feel very strong. Sometimes though, you know, some followers you don't have the Evo for, so it doesn't always get the chance to like steal something really great, especially with the 8 play point effect. But this card is still very strong and makes it hard on your opponent once you get to steal some of their like big powerful cards as well. Usurping Spine Blade, insane card. It's just straight up deal 3 damage, and your opponent puts the top card of their deck into their cemetery, and if there's 10 or more cards, you get to deal 2 more damage. So a lot of times once you get past the first few turns of the game, this is going to be a 2-cost deal 5 damage spell, which is insane. That also helps with the whole thief game plan. Once this gets online, this kind of takes out most of the important targets we want to get rid of throughout the game, because 5 health is usually the key health that a lot of the mid-range followers that we want to remove have for the most part. Disciple of Usurpation. This card is really powerful. It's a 3-drop storm with strike. Each opponent puts the top card of their deck into their cemetery. Then if there's at least 10 cards in your opponent's cemetery, give this follower +2 attack. So a lot of times this is 4/3, you get 5 storm damage, which is really insane. So later in the games, if you didn't have to waste too many of these early on, if you have a couple of these in hand, that could be 10 storm damage out of your hand for just 6 play points, which is obnoxiously powerful. Once again though, it does only have 2 health. This is why I feel like Angelic Snipe will be a card played pretty heavily in most decks, because once again, a lot of followers here just have 2 health and they need to be removed because they have storm damage, things like that. So the more popular thief archetype becomes in this meta, I feel like more Angelic Snipes will appear, and if there's less thieves, then you know your deck can probably play less Angelic Snipes. Floor Fencer, it's just super value all the time. I mean, if you've been playing Sword, we play 2 of the Evo. Card's insanely like high value. It just creates 3 bodies on the board that threaten a lot of damage, and your opponent usually has to waste about a couple cards to remove the entire board off of the 1 card you've played. It can also be searched off of Mage Leader as always, so you know, turn 1 Mage Leader, turn 2 Evo, get Floor Fencer, turn 3 Floor Fencer Evo if you're going second. Insane value. Gemstaff Commander, the worst best card in this deck, I guess, because sometimes we do need that search. We need to find some key pieces, and playing Gemstaff Commander is one of the ways to do that. We can get to our Leonidases, we can get to Octress, anything we want through this. We just want that extra value there of getting an extra card to our hand while actually building up a board that our opponent has to respond to. Gemstaff is just one of those cards that like I hate running, but it's like a necessary evil sometimes. Another new card, the Apostle of Usurpation. This card is really good value. A lot of times when you start playing it, you're at this point in the game, you're going to be getting that guaranteed draw, because it does force your opponent to mill 2 cards, and then if they have 10 or more cards in their cemetery, you get to draw a card on play. 3/4 stat line. Not the best in the world, but what's really cool is the Evo side of the card. On Evo, you select the enemy follower and deal it 4 damage. One of the big things that has Sword usually has issues with is like dealing with followers on the board, because we don't really play a lot of spells that just like clear up the entire board. Having damage on a body on Evo feels really good, because we get to deal 4 damage to something. We get a 4/5 that has rush now that can run into something if needed. Otherwise, it's 4/5 is still a pretty decent threat to be having. And we play this as a 3-of with 2 of the Evo, because at least the base form of the card will generally always give us the draw 1 for the most part, or at least build us towards the game plan of milling our opponent's deck out. Play 2 Dark Angel Olivia. I still think this card is criminally underplayed in Sword, especially when we're playing Leonidas. A lot of the times, if you get put into a position where your opponent lets you go first or makes you go first, Getting that Evo point to be able to always threaten an on 6 Leonidas Evo is obnoxious, especially once you develop this on 5, because not only do they have to deal with this 5/5 body on the board that also usually draws you a card or makes your opponent discard, or even heal 3 in some of the aggro matchups. The fact is that they have this, they have to deal with a 5/5 body, knowing that you're most likely going to follow this up with Leonidas Evo, which is insane tempo and insane like annoyance to have to deal with and play around, which is really rough. Finally, we play 2 of Leo. We play 2 of the Evo as well, just the 2/2 line here. This is kind of our late game win condition. You know, if we get to the point where, even though we're outvaluing our opponent, but they're still kind of keeping up, once we develop Leonidas onto the board, not only does it remove something off the board, and usually can remove 2 things, being that on Evo we get to pop something for 5 damage, then run this in itself. We get Leonidas's Resolve token, which is going to make it so the value that we have of all these followers just becomes insane. So like one of the big things here is once Leonidas's Resolve is on the board, these become 8 5s with Rush, or not Rush, Storm onto the board, which is obnoxious. So we can get 16 damage out of our hand with only 2 cards once Leonidas' Resolve is on the board, which is like the scariest part of this deck. I feel like the Thief archetype as a whole is definitely pushed more into the mid-range to late game game plan. You want to have some control elements here, and you just kind of want to mill out your opponent's deck a little bit so you can turn on all your Thief cards. What's kind of cool about this too is you can accidentally like win through milling a bunch of your opponent's key cards that they would have drawn earlier on in the game, which can be quite annoying. I think the only really horrible matchups for this deck might be like a very hard control Haven, which I know is going to come back to be somewhat popular, along with Abyss. Playing Thief into Abyss can be kind of awkward, because if they are playing more of this the Necrocharge game plan, and they kind of didn't put a lot of mill into their own deck, you accidentally giving them access to a lot of their like 10 plus Necrocharge effects can be like swingy for them, in the sense that like they can turn it on faster than they normally would have, which can give them way more value than you can like deal with. But still, at the end of the day, Leonidas' Resolve is very powerful, Octrus is very powerful. All these cards in this list are just strong key contenders for the Thief archetype. Try this deck out if you've been thinking about trying Thief out. I think if you're into the whole mid-range control game plan of a sword player, I think you will love this list. So try it out. Let me know how it is. Let me know what changes you might have made, because I know some people like playing Thief more aggressive. Some people like to mix it with Hero Sword even, which is can become very obnoxious if they draw correctly and set up things correctly. But yeah, this deck is a lot of fun. Be sure to try it out if you've been thinking about Thief. Besides that, if you like this video and this deck profile, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel, as we're trying to release as many of these out as possible, especially leading up to the release here, so you guys can start hitting the ground running and getting the most out of your locals, winning as much as you can. With that being said, guys, we'll see you guys in the next video. Later, everyone.